What I'm going to talk about the barriers. Given the shortened time, I'm going to focus more on the barriers than all the signs of hope, but I do want to allude to the signs of hope. Motivating ourselves, others, understanding the crisis, sharing power, and calls to action. The calls to action are really, I didn't bother, I took those slides out because, and didn't, I'm not going to go through them because they're in the report, so you can dig out the calls to action in the article. So reasons to be hopeful. Most of my career in environment, and I did my environmental science degree many decades ago. And there's always been this narrative of doom and gloom, but psychologically, it has really pretty poor effect on both environmentalists' ability to get on and do things and everybody else's. So I think we've got to be looking and encouraging ourselves with signs of hope. So the pandemic represents a rare but narrow window of opportunity to reflect, reimagine, and reset our world. And I just think that's an absolutely key and crucial thought. And I'm seeing it not just from World Economic Forum, but many other organizations, national, international, regional, whatever. This idea that this is a moment that we can, this is such a huge hiatus that this actually creates an incredible moment. And of course, it also creates a very scary moment for other agendas to sort of take over, as we saw in America last week. But this is about, let's make the most of this moment. And this is a quote. I've been interviewed a few times in webinars and things about my career and why I do what I do. And this is the sort of answer I give, that my life's aim has been to do all I can for as long as I can, to keep things as good as possible for as long as possible, in the hope the world will wake up. And in 2019, it did. I saw just such profound change in the way it was talked about in the media. We had Greta, we had the Extinction Rebellion, um, we had all sorts of signs of real big change. And I think if I read The Guardian today, some really negative, heartbreaking stories. I do suffer from eco grief sometimes. I'm not naive and stupid about this, but at the same time, I now actively filter for good news stories. And yesterday, I think it was, or the day before, the article came out about the billions that Boris is of the climate change agenda, that Boris is going to give to nature in the UK, and 50 countries have committed to 30% of their land and sea mass being for nature. And then I also saw something that the investment world, so this has nothing to do with sort of environmentalists or anything, and I visit other worlds and have done that over this year. I've gone into webinars and things from other worlds. An investment world, 70, I think it was 70-75% of investment decisions will be made based on initiatives and organisations and business that is offering sound standards around society, environment, and governance. That's shifted everything. That changes absolutely everything. So so research suggests that about 25% of a group thinking or doing differently is enough to tip the group. So what of concerns for nature and climate? How close to that 25% are we across society? Well, actually, it's incredibly good news. So early last year, Reuters did a survey across countries, and they found that 97% of people in those countries, or respondents, think climate change is serious. Um, and then you might think, yeah, well, that was all before COVID, and COVID would have blown all of that up. But Futera, which is a leading environmental sort of PR company, I suppose, did this survey. So 75 found in 2020, May 2020, 77% of people in the US and the UK believe we should make as many lifestyle changes to stop climate change as we're making to stop COVID. I mean, when I read that, I follow the CEO of Futera, and she herself was blown away when they got these results. So, and this is even more extraordinary, 88% believe the lifestyle change needed will improve their quality of life or make a difference. Well, that's a massive paradigm shift. Overseeing caring about nature and climate is going to be a big hit to my quality of life or my freedom of choices or whatever. That has utterly changed. And these are all good signs that we have indeed crossed this paradigm. But now, what do environmentalists, whether researchers or practitioners, actually do to sort of ride this wave, if you like, and really bring around the profound and rapid change that we need? So we've got to overcome barriers about noting ourselves and others, and that's, as I've already said, from loss and gloom and doom and tragedy and terror to stubborn optimism. So which inspires you to action? Had we had time, I did a little poll on this, but we don't have time. So the top picture is when I was doing the work for British Council in India. We were training 50 female mid to senior career research scientists working either in policy or research. And that was a photo out my hotel window. And if my window had been the other side, I'd have looked over the second picture. I wasn't there for that. That's from lockdown. So that's in India in lockdown 1. So what inspires you most? The year is 2050. The world is on fire. The air is suffocating and deadly, and entire countries are underwater. Or the year is 2050. The world is breathing. The air is fresh. Nature is thriving. Entire populations have a better quality of life. And when we did a poll on this, and it fits what other researchers have found, I did a poll on this at the conference last summer, and 25% said they thought the first one motivated them, and the rest thought that the positive vision. And that's quite typical. However, it's also psychological that fear responses are designed in our bodies and our neurology to be very immediate and short term. That's what they are. They're there to trigger flight or fight from an immediate danger. If you live in fear, you start going into what's called psychological collapse or something, which is where you become quite inert and quite frozen and unable to engage. Well, we don't want to be doing that to ourselves. So, and we certainly don't want to be doing it to other people. So let's sort of motivate ourselves with this positive vision. And those quotes came from Christiana Figueira, who I've had the privilege to meet before the Paris talks. She used to be UN Secretary for Climate Change. And these are some quotes from her book. Our individual boundaries are porous. We infect each other with ills and joys, so let's infect each other with stubborn optimism and determined action. And a compelling vision is like a hook in the future. It connects you to pockets of possibility that are emerging and pulls them into the present, and let's hold on to that. So I'm all for let's look at cup half full, let's be hopeful, let's sift and filter within the media, which is designed to be very negative, because again, it uses that negativity thing psychologically to draw in our attention and our fear responses and hook us in. So let's sift through for the positive, encouraging things. And then that leads me into sort of motivating others and understanding some psychology. So I'm reading out these quotes because I also know that some people take in knowledge through hearing it and others by reading it. So for those hearers, I'm reading it out. So here are some quotes about that. Green won't spread by guilt or fear. We need aspiration and desire. Creeps subtly into people's hearts. That's from Jane Goodall, the primatologist. And knowledge is overrated as a way to change behaviour. So then what do we do then? So we need to shift people from defensive and defeated to energized action. And this comes from research that was done in Indonesian forests. And what they did was they took a problem-solving approach to forest management with one set of communities, and then took a asset building, or there's a method called appreciative inquiry, which is looking at what's working and how that can be strengthened and enhanced. So they took that positive, constructive approach in another set of communities, and they looked at the effect it had. And look at this profound shift. So from frustration with problem-solving approach, looking at the negatives and how we fix them, to motivated when you look at what's working, how do we strengthen, enhance, amplify, build on, add to. Efforts not valued, to feeling current efforts towards a good outcome are valued. Seeing our environment is complex and difficult and a huge problem, to looking after the environment has many benefits and is doable. From feeling overwhelmed, for believing in their own capacity and agency to make a difference. From risk averse to fostering innovation. Disowning is not our problem, willing to get involved. No momentum to momentum for delivery. And we now design the dialogue processes we run to work on the right-hand side of this column. So we once have said to people, what's your vision for the future? And then we'd have said, what's blocking you? What do you need to fix? Or what's blocking you from getting there? We don't do that anymore. We say, what's your vision for the future? What are you doing that's taking you in that direction? What else do you need to do to add to any gaps or difficulties or challenges? And that has a profound difference on the psychology, the momentum, the social capital, the ability to work together of those involved. And that is indeed in a research context or a management context. And we're also very influenced by various psychological drivers. Now, I don't have time to go into all of these. Some are in the article, and you can have a copy of this PowerPoint afterwards if you want. But people have this natural bias to short-term and localism. That's not that they're silly people. That's how, again, how our brains are wired. So we first need to focus on long-term vision, for sure. But if we're always trying to hold people in long-term and big scale, our human brains can't cope with that. So think about long-term and big, but then bring it right back to, well, what can we in this group's gift get on with and do now? So we're bringing it back to the immediate, the agency of the group, and the near term to make progress towards the big scale and the long term. People desire autonomy, so we need to work with stakeholders to generate ideas together as equals. Oh, sorry, I've got an incoming cat. So people pursue happiness and avoid negative emotions. So again, that's about looking at what I've just said about amplifying and looking for the strengths and building on that. People are very driven to maintain self-esteem, so we need to ensure that any good efforts around in that environment and nature are uncovered and recognised and acknowledged, and that very often does not happen in research or in practice. And then there's various group barriers too. Some are about having a good reputation, which means working respectfully and appreciatively with groups. So about 10 years ago, we were doing some work around marine conservation zones, identification in seas off in near shore and within the 12 miles around the UK. And just before, there was a big national marine conference, and a leading, the CEO of one of the agencies stood at that conference and said to the room that these conservation zones were really important because fishers were rapists of the sea. And we had fishers in that dialogue, and there were fishers in that, leading fishers in that event. And they are public being called rapists of the sea. Well, she wouldn't have called farmers rapists of the land. And understandably, they took massive offence, and there was a huge uphill struggle to then get those people involved in a process to work out where is the least worst for fishers and best for nature areas at sea to be set aside as marine conservation zones. So we've got to learn to work respectfully and appreciatively with others, even when they have very different views to ourselves. And there's some other barriers and ways to overcome them. I'm not going to have time to go into. But this is about working with the grain of psychology, and by understanding this, environmentalists can avoid catalyzing and provoking the very resistance and reactance and barriers that really frustrate us, and then we blame the other people for them, but it's some of how we conducted ourselves that caused them in the first place. So barriers to understanding, there needs to be a fundamental shift from linear reductionist ways of tackling environment and climate, both in research and management, because they are fully integrated and they're part of a system. So we obviously know that nature regulates climate, and that climate creates the conditions for which life on Earth can flourish, and these are fully part of the same system. And if we don't take systems approaches, then, well, first of all, when we're working around environment or doing research around environment, this is the kind of context we're all in. So there's loads of interdependencies, loads of complexity, uncertainty, controversy, and multiple perspectives. And that's all one huge big can of worms that we're working in. And then we go, oh God, that's all too scary. Let's take a really narrow linear approach to this, because then it feels manageable to us. But in doing that, we fixate on parts of the system and we miss the whole. And this comes from an Indian fable where 5 blind men are trying to experience an elephant, and they become very, very adamant about their understanding of the element. And it's actually a parable and a fable about conflict and resistance to being open-minded and so on. So we've got an elephant is like a brush, or it's like a rope, it's like a tree trunk, or this chap says, no, an elephant is soft and mushy. And this is what we do in environmental research and environmental management, is we just get completely fixated on the bit we know, and we forget there's a whole much bigger picture to be understanding and comprehending. So as a result, we can act to produce short-term benefit at long-term cost. And had I got time, I could tell you some nightmares about that illustrate that little cartoon. And the solution to one problem can cause another problem with unintended results. And we're doing that a great deal. So, and again, stories around that. So wherever possible, we deliberately and clearly talk about that we're facilitating systems thinking, but more often we just design in techniques and enable people to do that thinking. And we're working with the chief scientist, DEFRA System Science Group, and doing some training with them next month, and looking at how soft systems thinking approaches can be more mainstreamed and understood. So this was some working with some scientists in Africa. So it was about transboundary river basin management. It was a piece of research led by Macaulay or James Hutton, I can't remember which they were at the time. And it was bringing together leading scientists from sub-Saharan Africa and some policymakers. And they wanted to create this policy brief about transboundary river basin management. They wanted to use the Mara River, which is where we were all based very close near, to understand, to use it as illustrate some of the kind of challenges and issues. So we did some systems diagramming as one of the sort of opening up techniques. And people talked about something that was changing somewhere along the catchment. And then we talked about, this is a causal diagram. So we started, you probably can't read the little speech bubbles. And when you're doing this technique, rich pictures, you don't need to use speech bubbles, but they wanted it. So, and we've got the Safari Lodge. So the economy around the Safari Lodges was collapsing. So you've got somebody saying, sorry, too few guests, you'll have to go, to a member of staff. What caused that? Well, we're not getting visitors in because they can't see game. What caused that? The game, there's less game because, and so there's less to see, but also the grass is longer, so even what is there you can't see. What caused that? So we've got two people talking now. I'm giving up on fishing and going hunting, and the other guy's saying empty nets again. Okay, well, what caused that? And now, bearing in mind we're working with very senior scientists, we've now got fish speaking, and one saying, I can't breed and I can't see to eat because of the sediment. Okay, well, what caused that? And then that's poor farming practice and legal and illegal logging in the uplands. So now we've got a picture, a system or insight. So obviously there's a myriad other drawings and ways you can understand this, but we're beginning to get a bit of an insight into a system. So this is not in any discipline, silo science. It's not sort of economic picture, it's not a social picture, it's not ecological or environmental, it's not a hydrological picture. It's a bit of all of that. And then also we've got a surprising thing that surprised us, which is you've got a mid-catchment change happening, which is connected up, down, first of all, down to the estuary, which is actually in this case Lake Victoria, and then up to issues in the uplands. And you'd never have found that by just thinking in any discipline or in a kind of linear way, which in hydrology is very much from the top of the river down to the estuary. So it starts opening up other possibilities and other insights. And taking a system approach makes it much possible to discover the small interventions that can catalyze virtuous systems change and not incremental change. And I threw this extra slide in. This comes from Funtowitz and Rivets. I'm sorry I haven't got the reference here. It's a paper from about 30 years ago. And it was talking about the difference between normal science and post-normal science. And normal science is a simple question like, I don't know, what crop grows best in this soil, in this location, or something like that. And post-normal science is much more, is research in this context of complexity. And when we were working in India, one of the practicals they did in the training was to think about what research they were involved in and where they would place it on this diagram. And then the people in their group could then challenge them whether that was the right place or not. And to everybody's surprise, including ours, an awful lot started out in the applied normal science sort of zone. And then as recognition of uncertainty and decision stakes and systems increased, nearly all of them ended up in the post-normal science zone, because people recognize the complexities and the systems around the research they were doing. There's the Sustainable Development Goals too that should be driving holistic thinking. This is not meant to be a pick and mix sort of selection where you just focus on one. You should be, any project or research should be trying to hit as many of these as it can in an integrated way, and at least be checking that it's neutral and not making it worse for one or other of these. And then of course you'll all be familiar with Kate Raworth's donut diagram, which with its the idea of trying to get us all into the safe space between the ecological ceiling and the social foundations. So I won't go into that one anymore. And then this is about power. So this is about how we've got to shift power around all of this as well. So this comes from some work done by a chap called Bovaird back in 2006, but we were tasked by the Scottish Government by doing some research and engagement empowerment in land use and land management. And we took his original model and we completely sort of developed it and tailored it and added to it in a context of environmental change. So you're planning land or sea use and management, who ought to be involved in making those decisions, and the other access is responsibility for delivery and implementation. And then this is not saying that any one of these categories is right or wrong. So we've got in the top left, traditional professional services, in the bottom right, self-organized. So stakeholders or communities are organizing something, doing something for themselves. But as far as possible for integrated management of large complex systems, you need to be looking in the middle at all sharing and planning and all sharing and delivery, which would be described as co-production. And these are some examples. So, you know, at the bottom right-hand corner, you could have community woodland energy, food or water or food production, of which there's a lot of projects in Scotland. Up in the top left, entirely legitimately, an emergency pollution response might sit there with the environmentalists plan at place what to do and then deliver it. But then there's all sorts of other possibilities of how the different elements, the sort of environmental professionals and the others, stakeholders and communities, work together and what they might work on. And then I tried to think about this in terms of research. So I was only doing this last night, and this is only bits of research that we've observed. So we've got the environmental researcher planning the research and doing the research, and that could be the simple science of which crop grows best here. So we've not been involved in that. But then these are ones that we have been involved in. So where it was shared design of the research endeavour, but then the researchers carried it out. So that was a Pan Scotland thing about the digital rural economy. The one where stakeholders and communities designed what needed to happen and commissioned some researchers to do it was down in Studland, where they commissioned some coastal process scientists to give them a report on the coastal change and erosion patterns and risks to some valued community features. And a fisheries cooperative also asked us to do some, wanted to put together a proposal and a bid to enable some researchers to then answer some questions for them. So again, I'm not going to go into all of them, but in the middle, you know, can you do full co-production in knowledge creation? Absolutely. So there's a project called GAT, which is long finished, but it was pan-European fisheries management, and the fisheries and the scientists had to work as equals to get the funding, and that was equals in designing the research, collecting the data, how it would be analysed, how it would be disseminated, respecting the needs of both the fishers and the scientists having different needs, for instance, dissemination and rigor of collecting data and so on. So it was absolute collaboration. And then we did some work with young people about, which was co-creating us and them, creating knowledge about their access to and ability to get the benefits of being by the coast. What were the barriers, what were the enablers, what would need to be sorted, and that went on to them taking action at their local level and approaching their MP and approaching a local arts project to support them in bringing about changes for access for young people to their coast. So benefits of co-production when you get it right are from incremental, piecemeal and ad hoc to changes to systems. You get new understanding, new innovations, resources and capacity, new relationships, integrated solutions that deliver multiple benefits, shared buy-in, very different types of governance and sharing of benefits. So in summary, hope, power action with hope. It's an embrace of the unknown and the unknowable. It's the belief that what we do matters, even though how and when it may matter and what and who it may impact are not things we can know beforehand. And in environmental work, anything we do now is going to impact generations to come. So we certainly won't know the effect we have. And hope is not something you have, hope is something you create with your actions. So it's time for a fresh approach. Be hopeful, motivate yourself, motivate others, do systems thinking, share power, take action. Thank you.